Hey, everybody, it is Friday, January 10th. We've made it through another week here on the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. On this January 10th, Houseplant Appreciation Day, according to the internets. Jill, what would you say the state of your green thumb is?
Non-existent? Does that count? Unfortunately, I would love to have plants. I'm always reading about how healthy plants are. They help clean the air. They put you in a good mood. But currently, there are no real plants inside my house. Whereas you, for anyone watching this on YouTube, could just see one right there.
And it's real. It's living. It's my job to keep it alive. Among the other plants, that's been one of my roles in the house. I do have to say the plants have suffered since the human baby came into the house, as we prioritize her needs, feeding, etc. And so some of the plants have gotten a little sad of late. But I need to make a point of caring for them now that we're back from vacation, putting some in the sun. You realize that they all have various needs. Succulents are nice because they require less attention, sometimes in terms of watering. I should say my mother down in Fort Worth, she's always been very big on the plants, the indoor plants. My father took care of the outdoor plants. So always a lot of plants in my family. And so, I don't know, they bring us joy, Jill, as you head to your next place. We'll team up and get your husband to let you have some living plants, not just fake plants.
My mother and mother-in-law both are very good with plants. My mother-in-law is great with orchids, and my mom is like a plant doctor. Orchids are really
challenging. I have to say, I need to talk to your mom about this. Wait, mother-in-law or mom is good with orchids?
Both, actually. Both are great with orchids. Really? They can bring any orchid back to life. Because we've gotten so many orchids as gifts, and within a month, it's a disaster. So my mom will take it, and then I'll be at her house, and I'm like, is that the same orchid that you resuscitated from my house?
I get served the videos on Instagram and TikTok from orchid people. Orchids are not cheap, by the way, and they're beautiful, and there are ways to revive them. Orchids, I can't get maybe I just haven't read in enough, or I'm not devoted enough to the orchid, but that's a goal of mine in 2025 is to be an orchid master.
Okay, maybe we'll do a special pod with Carol Wagner. Orchids 101.
Hey, listen, we just did a viewership survey. I don't know where botany ranked on the list of topics people are into, but let us know if you'd be into that.
Okay, let's get to some headlines here, starting again with the Los Angeles wildfires. The death toll is officially at 5, but expected to climb as thousands of homes and businesses have been destroyed and tens of thousands of people have evacuated. This as the economic loss from the wildfires could top $50 billion, making it one of the costliest U.S. natural disasters.
And the fire's still burning, Jill. That's just an estimate from the first 2 days.
And it comes as so many of the fire victims don't have home insurance. In other news, Jimmy Carter is being remembered by colleagues, family, and friends as a devoted public servant. A look at who's who at his funeral and how they interacted with each other.
Yeah, watching Obama and Trump chatting it up, trying to read their lips right now. The New York Post has taken a stab at it as at times Obama was laughing as Trump was talking to him. So a lot of people curious, what were they talking about?
The TikTok ban heads to the Supreme Court today. What to know about the hearings. And Russia's Kremlin says it is closely watching as President-elect Trump eyes Greenland.
The Russians curious as to how the U.S. is going to approach taking over new lands after going to war with Russia as it invaded Ukraine.
And Gen Z ditching booze, what they're doing instead.
Yeah, look at this ongoing storyline, especially in light of that Surgeon General statement last week calling for cancer warnings on booze.
Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating.
And what Jill's listening to. She's added that this week.
When I'm out of books, Moshe, when I'm done with Atlantic articles, Washington Post articles, chick lit, I turn to podcasts.
Yeah, listen, maybe it's time to, tweak it to watching, listening, reading, and eating. I don't know. That's kind of a mouthful, but
It doesn't flow the same way, but we can try it. All right, let's start again with the wildfires engulfing Los Angeles County. Nearly 180,000 people have been evacuated. There are currently 5 different wildfires burning. The Eaton and Palisades fire are still, as of this recording on Thursday evening, 0% contained. Combined, they've destroyed about 27,000 structures. We are talking entire neighborhoods that have been wiped out, like homes, schools, places of worship, businesses. Officials have said that at least 5 people have been killed by the fires, but Robert Luna, the LA County Sheriff, said that unfortunately that number is expected to climb.
At one point, we'll be able to do a more thorough search of these impacted areas. Some of them look like a bomb was dropped in them, where we will be able to bring in canines and other things to help us hopefully not discover too many fatalities. That's our prayer. But this is a crisis, and we don't know what to expect, but we're ready for everything. About
215,000 households are without power. It's a way to prevent further fires. There was some positive news, if you want to call it that, on Thursday. The winds died down a bit, and that made it a bit easier for the firefighters to battle the fires from the sky. That had been impossible for the past few days. So despite being absolutely exhausted, the firefighters were looking to get as much done because it's possible that the winds might pick back up over the weekend. One battalion chief for CAL FIRE told CNN that with the winds, it was like battling a fire from inside of a hurricane. Moshe, another angle here, the kids. There is one reporter who said that the kids are just nonstop crying. I mean, imagine seeing your house go up in flames and having to evacuate. It's extremely hard to process for an adult, let alone a kid. Schools have been canceled. And Moshe, as we talked about yesterday, of course, this has all gotten political.
Jill, just utter tragedy there, more than 30,000 acres. Some people were asking, like, how does this compare to Lahaina and Maui? And certainly similar in terms of an entire neighborhood, entire area wiped out, community, everything from the dry cleaner to the bank to the local taekwondo studio, everything gone in the Palisades. And just in terms of size here, the Lahaina fire took out about 2,000 plus acres. Palisades alone, close to 20,000 acres right now. And then you got the Eaton fire, also north of 10,000 acres there. I mean, you're talking upwards of 30 to 40,000 acres here, and pretty densely populated areas, communities that have been around for more than a century, gone. It's going to take years to rebuild this, which is why there's already a lot of finger pointing politically here. How did this happen? How was this possible? The LA mayor, we told you, she happened to be in Africa earlier in the week, out in Ghana, attending a presidential inauguration. Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, used to be a congresswoman, dealt with Africa issues, had a pre-planned trip. But it did come as there was a high fire warning. So she's gotten a lot of backlash for being there as the fire started. She's made her way back. She did a press conference the past couple of days, taking a lot of difficult questions there. In particular, one of the questions is about the fire budget of LA, which happened to be cut by just about $18 million this year. Now, context, that's about 2% of the $820 million budget the fire department gets. But it came as she said, it was hard times making those calculations. They decided to boost the budget for the police and some other departments, decided to cut the budget there slightly. It did come as there was a warning from the fire chief last year that the cuts were going to make it more difficult to fight fires, and in particular, some of the budget cut was around overtime pay for firefighters. So obviously, in the context of the budget debate, didn't seem like that big a deal. Some of it was more administrative roles, et cetera. At the same time, in the context of the worst fire in LA history, now being scrutinized, especially as there's an upcoming election for LA mayor here, and she's going to be facing a lot of questions around this. Here's a bit of what Bass had to say when asked about the fire situation and the budget cuts.
So I think it's most important to understand that we were in tough budgetary times. Everybody knew that, but that the impact of our budget really did not impact what we've been going through over the last few days. Again.
So that's her claim. Again, the fire chief said again, the fire chief had warned that this was going to impact firefighting here. Nonetheless, I think all of the above, everyone would say this was a very unique circumstance. These are record winds, 100-mile-per-hour gusts, basically hurricane-force winds. Dry conditions led to a situation where these fires just exploded. And some have, warned for years that LA had gotten lucky. Especially as the rest of California has been experiencing all these various fires, that at some point they were going to have an urban fire like this when there were the right conditions, the right winds, and it appears we got to that situation this week. One of the questions they'll be getting a lot of is also in regards to the infrastructure. There have been questions as to now that we've gone through several fires like this, both in Hawaii and California, where there's been such a need for the fire hydrants, and the fire hydrants are not equipped to handle hours on end of fighting wildfires. Fire hydrants are there to fight a house fire or a couple house fires, but they basically had every firefighter in LA tapped into the grid there to try to pull water out, and they couldn't supply enough water. Even though there is enough water in LA, they just couldn't get enough pumped, especially at certain elevations there in the Palisades. So there's a question in regards to infrastructure and whether they do need to upgrade things, build more power and water equipment around this as this becomes more of a threat here around drought conditions to prevent basically the tragedy that's unfolded here. Jill, you mentioned earlier in the headlines, we're talking about a potential $50 billion damage situation that could go up. That's an estimate from JP Morgan. Just looking at the current situation and the impacted areas, I mean, literally the Palisades, a community of more than 20,000 people, wiped out nearly entirely there. And this is not a cheap area. Some of the most expensive houses in the world, and especially the most expensive houses in America, located there. There are a number of celebrities who live there as well, who've lost everything. Paris Hilton posting yesterday that she lost everything. A number of other celebrities also losing their homes there. Billy Crystal and others. TMZ has been tracking all of that. Nonetheless, there's also a lot of non-celebrities who've been losing their homes there as well. So a particularly pricey area, particularly beautiful area in Malibu there, some of the impacted areas. And then you have the other area in Altamira and Pasadena. Jill, there's also been the ongoing debate between Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump over water. I have an explainer that I posted over on our Instagram account if you want to sort of dive into that. There's a conflation of issues there by President-elect Trump. Nonetheless, there are real issues in California. I try to break that all down in a new video we posted over on the Instagram account. So look out for that explainer, Jill. One note is would now people face homelessness. With all these homes destroyed. Airbnb, among the groups who are looking to support residents who've been displaced from their homes or have lost their homes. Airbnb working with 211 LA, which serves LA County to offer free temporary housing. You can check that out over at airbnb.org.
And Moshe, now so many of these Los Angeles residents now face an uphill battle to rebuild. It could take years to rebuild entire communities and neighborhoods. And insurance issues are making things a lot more complicated. Lynn Levin Guzman, who's a nurse in California, ignored the evacuation orders in an attempt to save her 90-year-old parents' home after she says an insurance company canceled their coverage. Here's an interview she did with local news.
I know I'm not supposed to be here, but this is my parents' home.
I know the feeling.
And they just they got canceled from their fire insurance. They've lived in this house for 75 years, and they've had the same insurance. And these insurance people decided to cancel their fire. And we're going through this, and it just happened, and they have no fire insurance. So thank you, California insurance companies.
Several insurance companies in California have stopped writing new policies in the state in recent years, as several record fires have taken place, record droughts, heat, and insurance estimating that it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, people asked about this over on the Mo News Premium Instagram account, and, let's be, blunt here, right? Insurance companies are there to make money. They're companies. They're private companies. And ultimately, if they determine that it's going to cost them more to provide insurance, and they're not going to make money off of that, they will stop providing insurance to high-risk people or high-risk areas. With climate change, among the factors here, they're canceling policies in places like Florida, in places like the Gulf Coast related to hurricanes, and certain flood prone areas now that we're seeing these more extreme rains. And in California, for a number of reasons, including fires. And so you've seen the number here in homeowner policy renewals that were declined in California between 2020 and 2022 alone. Over a 3-year period there, 2.8 million homeowner policy renewals were declined, meaning they once had homeowners insurance. And they said, you know what? You're too high risk now. Not for us. State Farm alone canceled 72,000 policies in California last year, including 30,000 home insurance policies. They are the largest home insurance provider in California. In the Palisades alone, about 70% of State Farm policyholders had lost their coverage. Again, wildfire risk, massive financial losses. We've seen insurance companies go belly up due to various storms and hurricanes along the East Coast. And so the insurance companies that do exist, they're doing a calculation. They're like, listen, we're going to stop providing this sort of insurance because we know there's going to be these $50 billion payouts, and we just can't afford that. So where do residents turn? Well, in some cases, the state or federal government is backing them up. When it comes to flood insurance, that's the federal government. When it comes to when it comes to fire insurance, there's something called the FAIR plan, FAIR, in California. It is more expensive than standard policies. It's designed to be more of a temporary safety net. The number of people on that plan has doubled over the last few years, reaching nearly 500,000 policies. That's going to set to go way up after this, especially. And in December, California passed a new regulation requiring insurers to offer coverage in wildfire-prone areas. However, implementation has been slow. So you have the government telling the insurers, you have to cover certain things here. Companies are required to increase coverage in high-risk wildfire areas by 5% every 2 years. So they're getting involved in the marketplace here, but insurers are not happy about that. But that certainly becomes an issue here. And there are, real questions as to where some of these people go. Will they return to rebuild their community? Certainly a number of people will. Some will decide it's just not worth it anymore, especially if they can't get insurance on rebuilding a house. And Jill, there's just larger questions about our infrastructure around this. Like, how do we need to build for this new world, for this changing world, around changing temperatures, fires, etc.? What, new ways do we need to build things in? Certain buildings survived in the Palisades. I'm sure they'll be looking at how they were built, the materials used, the walls used. Obviously, in many cases, that could be more expensive. You have a water shortage issue. You have these extremes in California with the atmospheric rivers one winter, drought the next winter. What sort of tactics will they do to clear brush, hills? That's a fight between Trump and Newsom that we've seen light up there. How they deal with water resources. We've talked about the Colorado River at times drying up, but Arizona depends on it, and Nevada depends on it, and California depends on it. All of that will continue to be debated as we continue to see the climate here changing.
Okay, time for the speed read from USA Today. President Jimmy Carter's state funeral in Washington on Thursday was a salute to his political legacy, worldwide humanitarian work, and commitment to faith. The service marked a rare joint appearance of the current and former commanders-in-chief just days before President-elect Trump will be inaugurated for a second term in Washington. President Biden sat alongside Trump and former Presidents George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. President Biden delivered the eulogy reflecting on his visit to Plains, Georgia in 2021, which was the last time he saw Carter before his death.
He saw well into the future. A white Southern Baptist who led on civil rights. A decorated Navy veteran who brokered peace. A brilliant nuclear engineer who led on nuclear nonproliferation. A hardworking farmer who championed conservation and clean energy. And a president who redefined the relationship with a vice president.
Carter was also remembered in the Washington National Cathedral by family, friends, top political allies, faith leaders, and Americans who had traveled through snow and ice in the nation's capital to pay their respects. Following the state funeral in Washington, the Carter family traveled back to Plains, Georgia, for a private funeral service at Maranatha Baptist Church. After the funeral service, the public is invited to line the motorcade route as Carter's remains are brought to his longtime home for a private interment. Moshe, it was fascinating to watch the interactions between the past, current, and future presidents and first ladies who attended.
Yes, who was talking to each other who was not talking to each other, who was shaking hands, who was standing. We only saw what the cameras showed us inside the main area, right? You had the front row where you had the Bidens, Harris, and Emhoff, right? The next row had the former presidents and former first ladies, as well as future president, now Donald Trump, as well as Melania. Missing from that row, Michelle Obama, who we're told stayed back in Hawaii, had a scheduling conflict. Now, I imagine I wonder if she will be at the inauguration in a week. And she basically was like, Barack, which one do you want me to come to? I'm not coming both times. I'm not leaving Hawaii both times. And then you had the next row behind that were the former Veeps. Dick Cheney was missing, but you had Quayle, Pence, and Al Gore there. So, it's sort of interesting. You're like, oh my God, I haven't seen Al Gore in a while. Now, interesting, it was just fascinating. I love this stuff because you so rarely see, this group interact in front of cameras, right? And you'll get a chance in about 10 days here to see it again at the inauguration. But I would imagine they saw each other behind the scenes. So anyone saying, oh, they didn't shake that hand, they didn't shake that hand. I don't know if behind the scenes they'd already shaken hands and done formal stuff and they were doing stuff for the cameras. But nonetheless, these are very savvy people who ran for president, who were president. They know that the cameras are watching them. So their body language is super important. So you see Bush come in there. He comes in the row. Trump and Melania are sort of looking down. The Bushes walk in. Bush gives a belly tap to Obama, they're on a pickup basketball team, just kind of pats him on the back. And I was like, it's Bush broing out with Obama.
Which somebody on social media wrote, despite his politics, whatever you think of his politics, W is certainly the most relatable of the presidents.
It's going there, gives one of the guys a belly tap, sort of regular dude. It's one of the reasons why Bush won the White House twice, right? By the way, the guy sitting right behind him was Al Gore, who technically got more popular votes than him, but that's a story for another day. Now, interestingly, as the Trumps walk in, notable, this is probably the first time Pence and Trump are in the same room in a very long time. Mike Pence stands up, handshake. He shakes Melania's hand. Not standing up, not really acknowledging them, not shaking their hand. Karen Pence, mother, sitting down there. I imagine she might still have issues related to January 6th and the fact that it's come out that Trump was like, yeah, if they kill Mike Pence, so what? So I think that clearly she holds a grudge that her husband was, willing to overcome for the handshake there. So that was fascinating.
And for anyone who didn't get your reference of mother, that is apparently what Mike Pence calls her. Which is just a little bizarre. But people on social media, someone wrote, mother was not pleased at Trump. And then another person wrote, who knew Karen Pence had such game? I mean, it was just it is just fascinating to see her reaction to all of it.
It's so fascinating because we have these rare moments. The last time this whole group together was 2018 for the Bush 41 funeral when former President George H.W. Bush died. And so when you have these funerals, that's the time you see these guys together, right? Now, you saw at times Kamala Harris turned around and she was watching Obama and Trump yuck it up. Now, we couldn't listen to what they were saying. We don't know if Obama was being polite. We don't know what Trump was saying. We know these guys don't like each other, right? Trump literally was this guy was born in Africa, made him the other, calls him Barack Hussein Obama, calls him the worst president of all time. He switches between that and Biden. And at times, Kamala would turn around being what are these? Clearly, she might have overheard what they were saying. Now,
are you guys still talking?
Are you still talking? Do I need to say hi to you? Because everyone knows the cameras are watching them. So they have to be very cognizant of that as they're waiting for the Jimmy Carter funeral to start. But there's a lot of images of Obama smiling as Trump says stuff. So the New York Post got a lip reader, and I imagine there'll be other versions of this, where effectively it sounded like Trump at some point, again, based on the lip reader, said to Obama, we have to find a quiet place. That's what they read him saying to discuss a, quote, matter of importance. That's what they believe they saw Trump saying there. It's unclear what that matter of importance was or if they found that quiet place. Then there was a reference. It looked like Obama said, yeah, we'll meet in the foyer of the cathedral potentially. Again, this is just a lip reader here. Trump talks about pulling out of something. It's the conditions. Can you imagine it? Is he talking about the nuclear deal that he pulled out of that Obama had made, right, with Iran? Is it the Paris Climate Agreement? What is he talking about? That's unclear. And then at some point, Obama says to Trump, yeah, it's a chore. It's a chore. Again, we don't know what they were talking about. We don't know if they both know that the cameras were on them, but it was super interesting. And Obama didn't have Michelle there, right? It was just Barack. So, he got seated next to Donald there. Then you had sort of in reverse chronological order, the Bushes, and then the Clintons over there on the end. And so I've been told by people who have worked for Bill Clinton that, he's big on eulogies and statements. He had a complicated relationship with Carter. He was sort of annoyed by Carter as the most recent former Democratic president and sort of doing his own thing around the world. So that's interesting here. The only former/current president who gave a eulogy was Joe Biden, and you played a bit of that. But just super, super interesting here. Noted one of the eulogies talked about one of Jimmy Carter's legacy items, which was giving the Panama Canal back to Panama, which, as we know, as we've talked about, Trump wants back. So I was waiting for the cameras to cut away to Trump so I could see his facial reaction as they were talking about Panama Canal, and the director didn't do that for me as I shouted at the TV.
The Panama Canal is having a moment in 2025. We haven't spoken about the Panama Canal this much, basically since the 70s.
No, we haven't talked about Panama Canal, and we got coming up here in the speed a little bit of Greenland.
One other quick thing about the funeral, and as you said, it's possible that a lot of these people said hello before the actual funeral, but the Clintons kind of looked like they snubbed everybody.
They didn't want to talk to anyone next to them. I mean, I guess like the Bushes sort of talked to the Clintons, but it's so interesting because these people all fought these crazy campaigns against each other. But they're in this very small exclusive club, right? Of the people who basically have had the most powerful, have lived in the most powerful place in the world or the most powerful position in the world. So they sort of only know things that the others know, right? Like aliens, who killed Kennedy, stuff like that. That's what I want to know if I'm president, right? And they're just like, can you believe the public doesn't know what we know? Or maybe they're talking about the drones in New Jersey. They're like, yeah.
That apparently is what Trump and Obama were talking. That
Totally.
is apparently what Trump and Obama have to talk about.
When are we going to tell the people
foyer.
what was actually happening with those drones?
The good news for all of us who live for this stuff is that they're going to be together again in a couple of weeks at Donald Trump's inauguration. So we could do this all again and read the tea leaves of what they're saying to each other.
And I will be there. I don't know how close to the action I'll be, if I'll be able to see them or whether you'll have a better view on TV, Jill.
I think I'll be warmer than you.
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. You might have reception. This might be a big mistake if I'm trying to cover it from the scene because cell phone reception might be bad. I might not have a good view. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay, now to another weather story that we're following. This from CNN. Snow, freezing rain, and rain are hitting the southern plains as a potent winter storm strengthens and begins its trek across the south. The storm's footprint will only get more expansive as it delivers disruptive weather over a nearly 1,400-mile section of the south into the weekend amid the coldest air of the season. It will likely have a major to extreme impact because the southern part of the country isn't really well equipped to handle winter weather. We already saw wintry precipitation in portions of western and northern Texas early Thursday morning with heavy rain drenching areas further south. The Dallas Independent School District, which is the second largest in Texas, announced that it is going to be closing all schools and offices yesterday and also today because of the storm. And schools are also closed in the nearby Plano Independent School District.
Joe, we're talking about 90 million Americans impacted by this system that's coming through, and overlapping with that system that came through a lot of this area last week. Winter weather alerts throughout, basically Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, the Carolinas. So straight across there, but we'll be watching this system. Some of these areas not as equipped as more northern states to deal with this sort of thing. Frigid temperatures will increase power demands in Texas. Grid conditions, though, expected to be normal. That's according to the Texas Power Grid, which we've told you before. Texas has its own power grid. There's basically 3 power grids in the country: the east side of the country, the west side of the country, and Texas. So we'll watch that closely. The state's grid, you might remember, failed back in 2021 during a deep freeze that resulted in the death of more than 200 people. So we'll watch that closely. Again, they think they'll be able to manage it. You could see some snowfall in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia in the northern portions. Atlanta, which hasn't seen an inch of snow in nearly 7 years, could see some snow as well here. So those of you down in the southeast, getting a taste of northern winter, at least for a couple days here.
It could be D-Day for TikTok. From the New York Times, TikTok's case before the Supreme Court pits national security against free speech. The Supreme Court justices will hear arguments this morning on the future of TikTok in the U.S. and whether the government can ban the Chinese-owned platform over national security concerns. Under a bipartisan law passed last year, TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance must sell its U.S. operations by January 19th, the day before the presidential inauguration. If they don't, it actually comes down to the app stores, which will be blocked from allowing new users to download the app or for current users to get updates. But TikTok says that if the court does not rule in its favor or delay the law from taking effect, it's going to shut down the social media site in the U.S. in 2 Sundays from now. If it was up to the lower courts, the app would be done. A lower court sided with the U.S. government in December. This case, though, could really go either way and has unlikely support on each side. ByteDance has refused to divest from TikTok, which has 170 million users in the United States, and is challenging this law on First Amendment grounds. Some of those who are on TikTok's side say that it is not the government's role to tell us which ideas are worth listening to or to cleanse the marketplace of ideas or information that the government disagrees with. But then there is the federal government's case that is centered around national security risks, from espionage to disinformation. A lot of the government's evidence remains classified. So during today's arguments, those details not going to be made public, but the justices, like lawmakers, will have full access to the classified information. On the government side, former Senate Majority Leader Senator Mitch McConnell, he helped get this legislation through Congress. He is urging the justices to uphold the law. He, of course, is joined by President Biden and other bipartisan lawmakers who helped to pass the law.
So court watchers here are thinking that based on what we've seen at lower courts, that TikTok doesn't have much of a shot here. The lower court decision was unanimous, made by judges appointed by both Democrats and Republicans, and their agreement across ideological lines also echoes the broad bipartisan support that Congress had in passing this. Remember, it passed by overwhelming margins of Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate, then signed by Biden. This whole thing was initially, proposed by Donald Trump in his first term before he switched his opinion on TikTok here. Now, he has sort of muddied the waters a bit. He sent a letter to the Supreme Court saying, hey, I'm going to be president the day after this ban takes effect. Can you just delay the decision, pause basically this ban? Let me deal with it. I am a negotiator, was part of the proposal, part of the thing they sent to court. Now, at the same time, it was not necessarily a persuasive legal argument for putting the law on hold here. And the court has already deferred deciding TikTok's request that the law's deadline be paused. Now, that's what TikTok is saying here. Like, take your time, guys, but can you please pause this January 19th law? It's a sign, the fact the Supreme Court hasn't paused the law, that the majority of justices don't think TikTok will be successful here in their arguments in this sort of free speech thing, saying that TikTok, this is a free speech argument, that, Congress has decided to very narrowly define the law here around national security, saying we're not just banning TikTok, we're only banning TikTok if they are continued to be owned by a foreign owner, ByteDance, controlled by the Chinese government, an adversary that can potentially use this app against the 170 million plus Americans who use this. So fascinating here, Jill. There'll be live audio of the Supreme Court as there typically is. A reminder, there is no cameras in the courtroom. The Supreme Court doesn't want them. They think it'll distract. They think it'll create a show like other courts. And so there is live audio. You can stream it via C-SPAN, the Washington Post, a variety of things on YouTube. We'll link to it on Instagram and have coverage of these. I know there's a lot of people that are watching this very closely.
Okay, so what's next? This ruling could have broad implications for the future of online speech and government regulation of foreign-owned apps. With this deadline fast approaching, the Supreme Court is expected to act pretty quickly. And then there are some wild card options. Trump's Justice Department could decide not to enforce the law. He has asked the court not to allow the law to go into effect. But one of the reasons that he is opposed to TikTok's ban was to prevent Meta from growing. But now that Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, has decided to eliminate fact-checking on Meta's platforms, perhaps Donald Trump might have a different take.
And appoint his buddy Dana White of UFC to the Meta board and, turn over a new leaf there. Who knows what the conversation was, that dinner that they had recently, Zuckerberg and Trump. and whether that's going to have an impact on Trump being like, Meta's not as bad as I thought they were. If TikTok goes, it is what it is. He has spoken about it in public speeches, Jill, and he, has this feeling that TikTok is one of the reasons that he won the election. So he sort of, wants that. He wants to, continue to make the push among younger voters. So it'll be fascinating since he takes over a day after this ban goes into effect.
And then there is the possibility, I would put this as probably the lowest probability that ByteDance could decide to sell. One of the names being floated, Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank and billionaire Frank McCourt say that they have the money needed to buy TikTok from ByteDance. But as we mentioned, China not really looking to get rid of this.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. The TikTok says China has no control over us, except for the fact that China actually has a veto on selling TikTok, the parent company, telling ByteDance you can't sell. And those are the options, right? Be banned or sell to a non-Chinese owner. Now, they could say, we'll sell TikTok, but we're keeping the algorithm. Well, then how much value is TikTok, which is, valued at several $100 billion? We should note McCourt owns the Dodgers in baseball. Kevin O'Leary's been making a huge push. He's also like a Canadian who's like, yeah, Canada should join the United States. He's had some dinners in Mar-a-Lago lately. Nonetheless, Trump, the negotiator, will be looking at this, I imagine, and this will get a lot of coverage inauguration week. Jill, there's going to be so much news. There'll be some news next week, but that week of January 20th, wow.
Okay, from CNBC, the Kremlin said Thursday it's keeping a close eye on President-elect Trump's ongoing pursuit of Greenland. Earlier this week, Trump said he would not rule out using military force to seize the strategically important Arctic island that's an autonomous territory of Denmark, saying it was in the United States' economic and national interest. Trump's comments have found some support among pro-Kremlin figures in Russia, with a number close to President Putin saying any U.S. move to claim Greenland would legitimize Russia's own expansionist aims and ambitions to restore former Soviet territories like the Baltics to its own sphere of influence and power.
Yeah. Putin's like, if you're going to just take stuff, I'm going to take stuff. I already take stuff. And so, you're the people who say I can't take stuff. But if you do it, great. I'm going to go move into Lithuania and Estonia and other stuff that I deem necessary for national security. In fact, the Russians would say, the Soviet Union had control over these territories, that they have a much more legitimate argument to taking over some of these independent states around them than the U.S. has in sort of making a push to force a sale or takeover of Greenland here. So, Russia being very, vague in a statement saying the claims are a question of bilateral relations between the U.S. and Denmark. And ultimately here, we'll see how serious this is. We told you earlier in the week, Don Trump Jr. traveled there. Trump, the president-elect, the father, saying, I'm not going to rule out military force to take Greenland. Do we see an invasion of Greenland happening? I would find that very surprising. But ultimately here, just the sort of bullying Denmark into forcing a sale of Greenland here, albeit we can have a legitimate discussion of the national security concerns of Greenland. The Greenland could be a great asset to America. The question is, how do you go about acquiring Greenland? How do you go about telling a country that says we're not for sale and we don't want you to take us over, taking them over? And so notable there that the Russians are like, yeah, we're watching what's going on.
And finally, from the New York Post, Gen Z drinking alcohol far less than previous generations, a trend that's been holding steady for the past 4 years, according to data. Instead, young adults are getting their social fixes at sober-friendly gathering hubs and alcohol-free bars that have been sprouting up throughout the Big Apple in recent years. At some, the focus is on playing board games instead of drinking alcohol. One 22-year-old tells the Post, "You'd think we would drink more with all the stuff we're hearing about the world constantly. You would think we'd want a distraction, but I think our phones are distraction enough, so we don't need as much alcohol." And that isn't to say that Gen Z gamers are totally sober. A 26-year-old tells the Post that when people of the previous generation think of drinking, they think of binge drinking. They think of going to a bar, slamming back 12 drinks, and being hammered the next night. They think of the idea of cracking open a six-pack before they go to bed. 12 drinks, Moshe. He says, "One thing I will say, part of it is a different conceptualization of drinking. I'll have a drink or two, but I don't go out with the intention of drinking." Like they're not going out for the purpose of drinking.
Right. And I think that there's been a shift here from millennial culture to Gen Z culture there. Jill, probably one of the most popular posters I remember in the dorm room 20 something years ago was the Animal House poster of John Belushi. It does come as late last week. We told you about the Surgeon General calling for a cancer warning on all booze. That would require Congress to get involved. That's unlikely, but nonetheless, there have been links found there. It comes as Gen Z trying to be more conscious of their health. They don't see drinking as a social obligation here. It does come as weed has been legalized in more places, so you have other options if you're looking for substances there. But roughly 38% of adults under the age of 35 now say they never drink. That is a 10% increase from a decade ago. So about a third, 1 out of 3 people under the age of 35 there. They also, those who drink less, 1 drink a week compared to other age cohorts. On the other hand, drinking has surged among adults 55 and above. About 60% of them are now drinking versus 20 years ago when it was about 50%. You are seeing a bunch of bars pop up across the country in New York with more non-alcoholic drinks among the sober curious bunch. And I've seen a few of those spots pop up in New York.
Nothing wrong with a combo of the two, board games and drinking.
Jill, you left out the legalized weed that I brought up as part of the analysis here.
Nothing wrong with board games, legalized weed, and some booze.
All in moderation, folks. Maybe not all 3 at the same time. Just the board games. Let's not get crazy.
Okay, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating.
Yes, before we get started here, a note, this week's Cheers to the Freaking Weekend brought to you by Amazon Audible. We've told you about them over on Instagram, on our podcast. Amazon Audible allows you to have access to hundreds of thousands of titles that you can listen to, as well as a special series, as well as podcasts. Right now, eligible new subscribers can sign up for a 1-month free trial of Audible Premium Plus. There's a whole bunch of special perks there. You can sign up via the web. You can sign up over at mo.news/audible. That is mo.news/AUDIBLE. I've been using it. I love it for one-stop shopping here in terms of being able to listen to your podcast, listen to your books, getting credits in there. Again, go check out Amazon Audible over at mo.news/audible. All right, Jill, what are you watching this weekend?
My daughter is in a show. She's in Barbie. She's playing Mermaid Barbie, and there are 2 performances this weekend, so I'm going to be pretty busy with that. So that's IRL in real life. And in addition, we're going to be watching the Cotton Bowl later tonight. Ohio State is playing Texas, and a trip to the college football playoff national championship is on the line.
Yeah, it's been fascinating this year with the first kind of 12-team playoff, the multiple weeks there, how they're going to feel about how this went. But you got a 5 seed and 8 seed, which is fascinating because in a typical year, you wouldn't have seen those 2 teams with a chance at the championship.
Yes, it's extended the season a bit. So my husband is very appreciative. Moshe, what are you watching?
I know I'm a little behind on this, but I'm catching up because we're going to do a special deep dive on this next week for Mo News Premium. The Menendez series on Netflix, the Ryan Murphy series, as well as the documentary. I've been catching up on all of that because there's going to be a big hearing this month in real life. The Menendez brothers could get out. And so I've been diving in, reminding myself of everything that happened there between 1988 and the mid-90s and how it all went down, what we know. All this could figure big into a decision to release the brothers from prison after more than 30 years. So I've been checking out both the acted out take as well as the documentary.
Okay, Moshe, what are you reading?
We have a new pod out today over on Premium Pod. By the way, if you're catching my drift here, there's the Mo News Premium Instagram, there's the Mo News Premium Podcast. That's the podcast is where you get early and exclusive episodes. Had a chance to interview my friend Neha Roosh, the author of Power Pause. You might know her Instagram account, Mother Untitled, that platform, in terms of women taking a career pause. It's fascinating, the research, the history of it, how it's changed culturally over time. It's also a workbook of sorts. You could pre-order it right now. It comes out officially on Tuesday. The book, again, is Power Pause. And Jill, what are you reading listening to?
Okay, so I have been listening to a new podcast called Raising Parents. It's from the Free Press, Barry Weiss's Free Press. It's with Emily Oster. She's known for her data-driven approach to parenting, and she's done a few different episodes so far, and they're broken down into topics like smartphones and other things. And I have to say, they're fascinating and have given me little tidbits here and there in terms of my parenting.
Yeah, Emily also has a great Instagram page.
Okay, Moshe, what are we eating?
Headed to Hexter's, is a restaurant on the Upper East Side we just discovered as we learn about our neighborhood. So Hexter's is spelled Hoexters. Alex and I checked it out a few weeks ago, and we're headed back, and we're headed back, and we will brave the cold temps here in New York to get there.
This is a weekend for ordering in. You guys are crazy.
That's our ambition. We might end up ordering in. Jill, what are you eating?
Okay, so I discovered this recipe on Instagram for a very healthy apple cake, and I'm going to try to make it. It's with apples, of course, oats, yogurt, egg, a little bit of maple syrup. At least that's what I'm going to be using. So I'll let you know how it goes. I'll document it.
You got to post it on your Instagram page.
I will post it on my Instagram, Jill R. Wagner, and I will let you know how it goes. I asked my daughter, I was like, you want me to make some apple cake? And she's like, nah. Like, what else you got?
More for you.
All right, everybody. That is a wrap on another week of the Mo News podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It really does help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Yes, and go say hi to your houseplants. Go talk to your plants. It might help them. Happy Houseplant Day, everybody.